And these have been very useful to all of us, covering a wide range of topics. Today, we have a topic closely related to climate change, which is heat waves. Okay, so there are a lot of predictions about climate change, but our confidence is the highest in the case of heat waves, because it requires no model, nothing. We just know that at the temperature goes over 2 to 3 degrees, many parts of India, especially the coastal region, as well as the heartland of Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, so on, they all get heat waves more and more. Okay, so it's very important to everyone to know how to deal with heat waves. Not only ordinary people, even sportsmen. Today, you find lots of cases where our sports person playing cricket under a hot condition are getting all kinds of cramps and so on. So this issue is very important. So I'm very happy that Dr. Paramesh invited Dr. Chinappa to give this talk on oral rehydration solution for heat waves. So I request Dr. Paramesh to introduce the speaker.
So good afternoon, everybody. This is a monthly program, as Professor Srinivasan said, and this is in collaboration, the Wages and Climate Change and Private Education Trust and International Pediatric Association jointly organized this program. And commenting about the topic, air pollution, global warming, climate change, they are totally interrelated. And the global warming heat wave has got two ways. Directly, it affects us, indirectly through the various things. Directly, as Srinivasan said, about dehydration is the most common, cramps and all these things. And also you have the sleepless nights going to happen, stressful situation, and whole is other thing going to come there. In addition to that, it directly affects the kidneys and also rehydration, cramps, and heat stroke, various things will directly affect. Indirectly through the water, through the fire, wildfire, and also the agriculture yield, various other things indirectly is going to affect. And dehydration, the most important thing, as Srinivasan said, the sports people, they sweat more, they lose salt, they lose water, but they take only water, they dilute the salt content, they had cramps and all these things. So these are all the important issues. So to talk about the important subject, we have none other than Dr. Jagdish Chinappa. He is the Chief of Pediatrics in the Manipal Hospital. He did his MBBS, MD in Mumbai, and I know him since 1982. And also he has bioethics certification from the Kansas Children's Hospital in USA, and named Indian Academy of Pediatrics, various state level, national level. He was IAP election commissioner also, knowing his straightness, upwardness. And as a person, I know him as a man with certain values, and he believes in practice what he preaches. And it's a great honor for me inviting my friend Jagdish Chinappa to take over. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Dr. Paramesh and Dr. Srinivasan, for that excellent introduction. Coming to Indian Institute of Science always brings back old memories. I used to play here as a child when I was about a year old. So it's about close to nearly 70 years since I've been coming in and out of Indian Institute of Science in various departments. And I can still only say I'm in awe whenever I come in here, because it's such a beautiful campus and so many great things happen in this campus. In fact, so many collaborations we've had in this campus to try and develop something new. In fact, one which we are doing right now with one of the departments is to try and develop a simple test to whether we can check for cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a rare condition in children which produces lung disease and GI disease, of course. So we want to find something which is simple. Right now, the diagnosis is complex. Many of our children cannot afford to go through all those genetic tests and all that. So we are trying to develop something very simple. And it's in a quite advanced stage. We have done our 2 preliminary trials at University of Southampton. So coming back here is always a pleasure, and Dr. Paramesh, of course, has invited me many times here. And all the time, I've always been very grateful to him to bring me back to this institution. when he gave me this topic, it was a kind of a, suddenly you get a really fast ball and you don't know what to do, whether to face it or whether to duck and run away. So, so I said, okay, let me at least fend myself off. And so I'm not an expert on global warming or climate change, but I can understand the importance of this in terms of our clinical practice. So what I'm going to do in the next half an hour, 40 minutes is to try and give you an overview on what I feel are the important issues from a doctor's point of view, from a pediatrician's point of view, and leave it to the experts to comment on the other aspects, or rather the global warming and the scientific aspects. Dr. Parmesh is an expert on that, so he will be able to comment on that. So let's start off with this on. Yeah, I'll do the full screen. Don't worry. I'll do. Yeah. So basically, the overview which we'll look at is first is understand global warming from the health perspective, more for me than for the audience. 2, consequences of global warming on health, especially for dehydration and diarrheal disease. 3, introduction to oral rehydration solution, because that I don't know whether many of you will know too much about it, but I'll just give you a brief overview about it. What are the challenges, innovations, and public health responses to the challenge which we have in this kind of implementation? Okay. So understanding global warming. The first thing is that we know that global warming is basically a long-term heating of the Earth's climate system since pre-industrial period. And this is due to human activities, primarily because we burn a lot of fossil fuel, which increases the heat trapping greenhouse gas levels in the Earth's atmosphere. And we know that this is primarily because of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, which trap heat and produces the temperature to rise. What is important is, okay, that the global temperatures have risen significantly in recent times. If you look at the last 30 years, you can see that picture. It's not very clear, but you can see that the dark part of it is what has happened in the last 30 years. So the last decades have been the warmest on record, highlighting the severity of progress of this warming. And this is what is really scary. The clear upward trend calls for immediate coordinated action by all of us. Excuse me. Excuse me. Is this automatically going? I think just stop the show, because it's just moving on its own. The slideshow has been put, I think. Yeah, thank you. Because then it goes faster than I can talk. No, it's okay. Again, it's the same. It's on slideshow again. Can you do it without the slideshow? Can you put this on? Okay, now let's look at some of the consequences on health on the global warming. Basically, these are the people who are going to be affected, or the areas which are going to be affected. One is, of course, human beings are going to be affected in many ways. 2, there's going to be significant climate change in terms of rain, sunshine, etc. Water bodies, again, Dr. Parmesh mentioned briefly that this is going to be another issue. Agriculture, and finally, microbes and fauna. So what we're going to interest ourselves in the next, in this lecture is going to be primarily on the effect on humans and on microbes. Of course, we'll touch upon the microbodies. As we said, health effects on human beings related to warming is going to be on basically look at 3 main issues. One is these heat waves are going to increase heat exhaustion, heat stroke amongst the population if it goes above a particular level. All of us operate in what is called as homeostasis in a very narrow range. And if the temperature keeps going up, then we land up with heat wave, heat stroke. And this is not dependent on what is called as the hypothalamic control. The hypothalamic control of temperature is only when you have things like fever, etc. So there is a difference between fever and hyperthermia. In fever, the hypothalamic set point is raised, and then you can bring it down with medications like paracetamol and others. However, if you have hyperthermia, this is not a set point problem. This is a problem where the body is being heated by an external source, and this will not respond to antipyretics. So you can give any amount of paracetamol or any medication, but it will not come down. So the only way to reduce this heat wave is by increasing hydration and by external cooling. Now, external cooling can be put the person in a cold room. It can be on, you can put water. You can also, some people even, if it is extreme, can put ice. There are ice enemas which can be given if it is really bad. So there are many other ways of bringing it down. Next is heat waves exacerbate chronic health conditions. Now, many of the population, much of the population has some chronic disease or otherwise. And increase in heat will worsen these disorders, especially those who are suffering from chronic arthritis and chronic other diseases can land up with these problems. Another very important thing to note is that the elderly and children are vulnerable, and therefore they may not indicate till they reach a very bad point or very severe point of the heat related injury. So these things have to be kept in mind, that these three groups are particularly at risk. Now, waterborne, you know that the water issue is another major thing. We can alternate between drought and floods. And this is another problem because of the global warming. And it has, as Dr. Parmesh mentioned, it can have not only a direct effect of the water itself, but it can also cause other things like, for example, mosquito and vector habitats can increase the spread of diseases. We know very well that once there is a rain, excessive rain, there is a growth of various types of mosquito, and there is an increase in dengue, chikungunya, malaria, and all those other things can come in. And right now, if you see Bangalore, we are having a spate of chikungunya. And that's primarily because we had a fairly good monsoon last few days. And if it becomes more, then this can be widespread. Then, of course, because of the increase in disease burden, because of the waterborne diseases, obviously your healthcare systems are going to be strained, and you will tend to spend a lot of money on this. Then, of course, it can reduce water availability. You may not have fresh water sources. Contamination can take place because of flooding. And because of the either the increase or decrease in water, you can land up with agricultural productivity loss. And again, you have food supply and health risk, which can be attributed to this water resources and food security. So these are all the things that can happen, or the consequences of global warming can be quite significant on human beings because of not only direct effects, but indirect effects. And this can be up to a certain extent, we can mitigate them, but beyond that, you can land up in a serious problem where you may not be able to mitigate it. Then we'll come to another thing is what can be done about it. One of the simplest things that can be done is the oral rehydration solution. And we know that 29th was the World ORS Day, which that is why Dr. Parmesh thought about this topic in the first place. And I'm really happy that he has propagated this to everybody. Now, ORS is a very interesting thing, and it has been there for a long time. What is ORS? ORS is a simple solution of salt and sugar, which treats dehydration and diarrhea, and dehydration caused by diarrhea. It was developed in 60s in the United Kingdom, and then it was revolutionized by many centers, especially in India and Bangladesh. In India, Professor Mahanabulis in Bengal and in Bangladesh treated millions of patients with cholera who had dehydration and for whom intravenous fluids are not available. So it showed that it could work as well as IV fluids in a large percentage of people with moderate dehydration. So I think it was something that has been a revolution in medicine. And the simple thing is based on a very simple physiological fact. That is, ORS, when it is combined with sugar and salt, is preferentially taken by the intestinal cell and transmitted across into the bloodstream, as you can see here. And that is very important. Whereas if you give plain water, that does not happen. It happens only when there is an augmentation with sodium and glucose. And this basic discovery that sodium glucose augment water transport into the blood through the intestinal transport system was a very significant finding. And in fact, this is one discovery which is simple, straightforward, and it can save millions of lives. Composition is simple. The WHO UNICEF is a standard composition now with sodium chloride of 2.6 grams, glucose of 13.5 grams, potassium 1.5 grams, trisodium citrate of 2.9 grams to 1 liter of water. Now, previously we used to have what is called, as you can see there, that the osmolality of what is called as the standard ORS was 311. But after looking at the complications of that particular standard ORS, which was basically it reduced the serum sodium level because of the osmolality. And therefore, they said, now we will stop it and we'll change it to what is called as a reduced osmolality. What we currently use now is the reduced osmolality ORS. That is the one with 245 milliosmoles per liter. The one we previously was 311 milliosmoles per liter. The one which you see here, or Risomol, is one of the ORS solutions which is used in malnutrition. And because malnourished children, when you start rehydrating them, will land up with other problems like hypomagnesemia and etc. That is added on to that fluid so that you can reduce the chance of their landing up with a micronutrient deficiency during the period of rehydration. That's the philosophy of giving the Risomol or the for malnutrition. Commercial products are available where it's usually to mix in 1 liter of water. That's a WHO and UNICEF standard packs. But you can make homemade solution also. That is, you can use 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar, add it to 1 liter of clean water and use it. This can be used in cases where you don't get the ORS. However, this has its problems because measurements may be wrong and you may land up with issue. So the important considerations when you're doing this is, one, you must have a precise balance. Too much salt can worsen dehydration. This much you must remember that. And too little won't be effective at all. So it has to be an optimal salt which is there in that. Second is, it should not taste saltier than tears. This is a simple way of knowing. Okay. So if it is that, so you start crying and see whether it's going to be the same taste as that. If it tastes very salty, too concentrated. Another important thing is people think that once you give ORS, diarrhea will stop. That's not the fact at all. What you're doing basically is you're treating dehydration and not the diarrhea. Diarrhea will settle on its own. Most diarrheas do not need any medication. They'll settle down on their own itself. And in addition, it's important to tell mothers to continue feeding their children. Because remember that oral rehydration solution is a temporary feature when you correct dehydration. But nutrition is extremely important in a child who's got loose motions. So this, as I said again repeatedly, one of the greatest success stories, and it's also very simple and elegant. Now let's look at the interconnection between global warming and diarrhea and dehydration. We have looked at two components. One, we have looked at warming. Two, we have looked at ORS. Now let's look what are the interrelations between these two. Now, as you know, diarrheal disease is extremely common. We have seen almost in 2021, 340,000 children under 5 died because of this. And it varies by age. Children under 6 months are the worst who can land up with problems. And another problem is female children have additional vulnerability. So diarrheal disease is very common in our country, also in Africa, and the majority of deaths, of course, have been reported in Africa. Now, this is a very interesting graph. You can see here that the relative risk of getting diarrhea goes up as the temperature, ambient temperature goes up. And this is extremely important because it shows you very clearly that there is a significant correlation between the incidence of diarrhea and the rise in ambient temperature. Okay, and if you look at it, some people have measured that for every degree rise in the mean temperature, the risk of increases in diarrhea by 4.4%. That means every degree that it goes up, the risk of getting diarrhea goes up also. And this is a very important point to note, that this can happen even in places not only in Africa, but even in places like Nepal, which is a mountainous region where you may not expect this to happen. So measurements even there have shown that this is not restricted to places where there is plenty of sunlight. So what are the pathophysiological mechanisms by which this happens? One is higher temperature will allow more bacterial growth. This we know from studies right from long time, that water sources and food, especially if you have food which is at a higher temperature, there's definitely more growth of bacteria. So that's one thing that can happen, especially for cholera and E. coli. E. coli is the commonest one which can produce diarrhea in children. And that can increase quite significantly when you have an increased temperature. Then it can also cause basically environmental reservoirs can have more of the organisms because the fecal load tends to increase when the water temperature also goes up. Other than that, there's also a very interesting component called vapor pressure deficit. Vapor pressure deficit means that when you breathe in and out, okay, you tend to produce some amount of air, fluid loss in your breath. Okay, that is the vapor which is coming out from your lung. Now, as the global temperature rises and the relative humidity remains constant, you have what is called as VPD rises. And there's an increased evaporation rate which happens there. So that what it does is changes the mucus layer by about 58%, making it compromising respiratory health also. So therefore, the heat not only causes diarrhea, but it can compromise respiratory health through this mechanism. So important to know that. So climate change is very, very important, and the global warming directly and indirectly affects both diarrhea, pulmonary function, and the flooding can cause its own problems. Heavy rainfall can cause what is called as a flush effect. Flush effect means, let's say you have warm temperature across for a long time, there's warming, and suddenly there's a rainfall that takes place. What happens is all the sewage, all the bacteria which have been growing are flushed into the water system. That is why if you ask most pediatricians, after the sunny months, when the first rain starts, is when children will start falling sick. And you will see all the pediatricians' offices full there. And that's because basically of what is called as the flush effect. Because of the dryness and which takes place, and then the rain comes in and carries out the flush along with it. So the first flush is again dangerous. Another thing is rural communities face a different challenge altogether because they don't have adequate water sources, and they can be vulnerable for various disruptions. So here another very interesting chart which shows you that as the warming increases, the percentage of diarrheal hospitalization increases. And this is particularly true in children under the age of 5 years. You can see the red line there that is under 5. And you can see they are again particularly affected when global warming takes place, and the hospitalization starts increasing when the temperature goes up. So this is an indirect correlation, again telling you that there is a risk of this. Then, of course, warm water I said is, and flooding we talked about, and again this is going to increase the healthcare costs. So this just summarizes what I already told you. Now the important thing is as far as the dehydration. Now we have talked about diarrhea and infectious disease causing problem. Now we know that water is a very important component in the human body. You can see that the brain has almost 73% water, and you have blood which is 94% water. Now when you start dehydrating, okay, then all these organs are going to gradually start not functioning. And the ones which are typically more water dependent will start showing you problems. Like the kidney will start showing you problems first. Then you'll have the brain which is going to show you problems. So basically it again goes phase wise. And this can happen especially in vulnerable populations, children, outdoor workers, and again the stress on the healthcare system can happen. So water is a very important component. And to manage this, we can manage dehydration by oral rehydration solution. Now, there are some specific ORS solutions which are useful for dehydration, especially in countries where they are facing not diarrhea, but just dehydration because of heat loss, because of increased sweating and through the lung. And they have also specific formula which are available. They are called Super ORS, Super Hydroid. You can see here is one of the commercial brands. And they, in addition to that, you can also use what is called as various other components which are added to the ORS solution. And therefore, this can restore the fluid balance. Now, another important thing which we need to consider is about the storage of ORS when your ambient temperature is high, because most of the ORS solutions are very heat sensitive. Now, as the heat increases, they don't remain stable, and especially if you start looking at solutions which contain sodium bicarbonate, it's a problem. So that is why it is very, very important to use citrate rather than bicarbonate in these solutions. Otherwise, the storage may be a problem. Another thing is the humidity at which you store. Then another thing is you have the combination of glucose monohydrate with trisodium citrate. This also can lead to problems. I'm not going into details, but basically it tells you that the storage conditions and the storage salts have to be also looked into when you're going to keep this ORS in heat conditions. This is a very simple solution, but to a complex problem, but it's highly underutilized. Despite this effectiveness of relatively ORS, you can see here that only 44% of children who need ORS don't get it. And this of course is regional. Most of them are in sub-Saharan Africa, basically because of missed opportunities. We know that this is a very effective solution, but there is a missed opportunity. And we'll just explore a little bit about, and you can see here that everywhere, all over the world, this is the target, this is the WHO, this is the target rate, but the current rate of utilization of ORS is pretty low. Okay, and the reason for that we look at a little later. What are the barriers? A study which was done in Bangladesh shows that basically there are 4 issues. One issue is availability and accessibility. Availability is because there is inconsistent supply chain, because it's not uniformly supplied. In certain areas, you may need more or more, but that's not available. So basically, supply chain issues are a problem. Second is affordability. Most of the commercial ones are expensive for poor families, so they may not buy it. So that is one issue. The second is knowledge and awareness. Even amongst doctors today, a large number of doctors still will prefer to use an antibiotic or an antidiarrheal first before they start giving ORS, because ORS still is not in the mind of many practitioners, despite so many years of using it. Because after all, it's such a simple solution, and you have to show that you're doing something great. And you can't do it by just saying put salt, sugar, and give it to your child. No mother will say that. So you need to look at how to get a stool test and do something else and something else. So basically, the acceptance is a problem, and knowledge and awareness is a problem for many people. Then basically, government commitment to produce more ORS, government commitment to spread the message. Then private sector is obviously not interested, excepting for few companies. And finally, the design and acceptability for taste preferences. Many children may not like some of the taste of the ORS. So those are issues that are the implementation barriers. Vulnerabilities, as I mentioned, these are the 4 things that you need to keep in mind. Children under 5 years are particularly vulnerable because they are prone for dehydration quickly and they have limited immune capacity. Elderly population is the next. Geographic vulnerability, rural populations have problems. And of course, women and girls also have problems there. Now, what are some of the innovations and public health responses that will make a difference? Basically, we need a coordinated effort from all 4 of the stakeholders. The first is the WHO, where we are looking at a global scenario, but after the current scenario with our favorite president, who has stopped funding for many things, we don't know where that is going to go. The next is, of course, government agencies and local bodies who look into, taking part in publicizing, taking part in availability, supply chains, etc. Then organizational, we'll have to look at various coordinating between different ministries, environment ministry, health ministry, water and sanitation ministry. So all these people have to get together. And of course, doctors, nurses, and again, Ayush practitioners, because a large number of them are also, dealing with the health of the population. And finally, the community, we need to look at health literacy and look at how to look at it. Now, WHO has very nice guidelines, and Professor Parmesh is already on the WHO various committees, and WHO and international guidelines are there on how to build climate resilient health systems for adapting planning. Then we have the WHO COP26 report on climate change and health, which outlines about 10 priority recommendations on this. And successful ORS scale-up requires coordinated approaches. We also need to have a good climate-informed health surveillance system. The surveillance system is very important to know when you are going to land up with a problem. Remember also that sometimes you can get what is called as surges. You may have a large number of children or a large number of people being affected by heat. This happens typically when there is a heat stroke, when there is a very high, for example, I think last year in Rajasthan, they had a very serious problem because a large number of people were affected by the global warming and heat. So therefore, you need such investment in data infrastructure, training of health personnel, and coordination. Now, again, another important is what is called as climate resilient WASH. What is WASH? WASH is basically looking at water, sanitation, and hygiene. So you're looking at WASH systems. So you need to have climate resistant WASH systems and early warning systems, which are integrated WASH management to look at how we're going to take it forward. Then again, technological innovation is important, like ORS delivery can be done in improved packaging. There can be co-packaging with zinc supplements, smaller sizes, package sizes, because after all, a child will need about 200 ml. You don't need to make 1 liter. And climate resilient healthcare infrastructure, how to store, how to transport, those are all technical innovations. And of course, digital supply with artificial intelligence, that may not be a problem now. Community education and outreach is important in terms of hydration awareness, sanitation practices, and use of early ORS. Now, what is the future? The future is basically we have a lot of research to do to look at what is the climate health relationships. How does increasing temperature increase the amount of diarrhea? We still know that the bacteria go up, but we still don't know very much about what else happens there. So those kind of researches are still required. We also need to look at how the pathogens are going to survive, how water contamination and human exposure can be reduced. We also look at effectiveness of adaptation. How will we adapt to these situations? And I said climate resilient, what systems need to be looked at, and how we can economically take care of these patients. So implementation priorities are plenty. How to get the ORS into the community, and also surveillance systems, as I mentioned, training programs, community education, and policy frameworks. So a lot of areas where there is research that is required to take care of this. So as in conclusion and recommendations, I would say that the evidence is clear that climate change is going to alter the epidemiology of diarrheal diseases. We are going to see more and more diarrhea and dehydration, and implementation of proven interventions like ORS is going to be critical. We need to have unprecedented cooperation between the scientists, between the clinicians, between the government, between the public health authorities. So this is a very critical thing that we need to look at. So the key recommendations are scaling up ORS access through improved supply chains, community distribution networks, and removal of cost barriers. Investing in climate resilient wash infrastructure with particular attention to vulnerable communities. Developing an integrated surveillance and early warning systems combining meteorological and health risk. Strengthening the healthcare system capacity for climate-related health risks through training, infrastructure adaptation, and surge planning. I think all our students need to be taught about the global warming and how it's going to affect the epidemiology of diarrheal disease in future. So implement comprehensive prevention strategies addressing both immediate treatment and vulnerability factors. So a global temperature rise, the window for effective adaptation narrows. The life-saving potential of ORS must be fully realized through systematic removal of any barriers, while simultaneously building the healthcare system resilience to climate change impacts. Up to this quite significantly. Thank you very much.
Any questions, please go ahead.
Yes, sir.
There are two kinds of heat waves, dry heat waves and humid heat waves. Problem of this ORS is more important than which?
I think
the coastal region or Rajasthan, Gujarat, they're very different.
Yeah, true, sir. Very good question. Very nice question. But I think it will be more in the dry climate rather than the wet climate, because wet climate still there will be not so much of heat loss from your skin. So in a dry climate, you will be losing more from the skin.
I think I have to share here. So in the midday, when people in my village, when people used to come selling things in the basket, which has some water, my grandmother never used to give water only. Water, jaggery, and coconut, solid coconut. Solid coconut has got some salt. 100 grams has got about 37 milligrams. And this is and also in our village, grandmother used to give diarrhea coconut water. It has got exactly same salt content. So these are all the traditional values. We are scientifically have to prove it them. I think ORS, as I rightly pointed, Manipal and all Bangladesh, India started in 1970, 75.
Implementation, yes.
Yes. And also, one incident I have to quote here. I think when I was doing my residency in the United States, Professor Paul Woolley, he asked me, sorry. Okay. So he asked me, what is the ORS solution? How do you prepare it? I said, sir, 5 grams of sugar and for 5 grams, 10 grams of salt and 1 liter of water. Parmesh, you should not talk in volumes. What he said, we had 10,000 kg worth of guns, 10,000 kgs of boys. Does it match? You should talk in millimoles. That's what they tried that. So positive and negative has to be equated. I still remember what he said that time. With all this thing, I sincerely thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Doing a wonderful talk. I request Professor Srinivasan give a small token of appreciation and give from this one. Sir, please, Dr. Let's have a picture after this.